Well, I want to go ahead and go right into what we're trying to talk about tonight, because I really want to. I want to try to do this if I can. Is that up there, Luke? Are we ready to go? Okay. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Israel and the conflict and what this is a prelude to. Everybody's got an opinion on what's happening in Israel with Palestinians and all this stuff, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. First, I will say that. What I want to try to give you tonight is not my perspective of it, because opinions are just like noses. Everybody's got one. What I want to try to do is take the Bible and show you what God says about what's happening over in Israel tonight. And so as a result of that, and I really believe that part of the problem that we got in this, that while it has not caused it, we actually believe that in a way that many of this is happening because of Satan himself. That's where we got to lay the blame more than anything else. But one of the things that's happened is many churches are teaching the idea of simply all-millennialism. And what all-millennialism teaches, whether we want to like it or not, it teaches that the church has replaced Israel. If the church has replaced Israel, then we've got two problems with that. One is that if that is the truth, then God has gone back on His word, because He promised Israel that they would be saved. In fact, you read the 11th chapter of the book of Romans, and it tells us simply there that all Israel will be saved, is what he says. And he even asks the question, Paul even asks the question in Romans 11. He says simply this, he asks him the question, will Israel be saved now, or has God turned His back on Israel? Well, in chapter 11, verse 1, he says, I say then, has God cast away His people? Certainly not. For I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. And then he says in verse 2, God has not cast away His people whom He foreknew. Or do you not know that the Scripture says of Elijah how he pleads with God against Israel, saying this? So we don't believe that God has done it. We still believe He has a plan for it. And I'm going to show you that tonight. But by the same token, I want you to look at something. Now, the second thing, though, about this is this. Not only has God not gone, but if God has gone back on His word that way, then how in the world can you and I, from a standpoint, believe what John 3:16 says? Because if God will go back on His word to Israel, then why would He not go back on His word? And listen, the Bible tells us in the Titus chapter 2, or verse 1, chapter 2, that God does not lie. He tells us that His word is forever settled in the heavens. He tells us simply that He will not change. He changes not, is what the word says. And so God has had a plan from the time of after the sin of Adam and Eve all the way through till the day comes that Jesus comes to get us, and He begins to take this earth and go through the tribulation. He's done this. Now, what are we saying about all-millennialism? All-millennialism basically teaches this. It teaches that that there is no millennium, even though in chapter 20, 6 times, the Bible talks about 1,000 years. He says, no, there's no millennium. And they also are teaching that there will be most people, all-millennialism teaches that we're in the tribulation right now. Well, we're not in the tribulation. When I read Revelation, I read some of the horrendous things that are going to take place. Those things have not taken place. So I want us to get into this a little bit, and I want to start off by reading from Psalms 83, and if we can, Psalms 83 verses 4 and 5, and if we can get that up there, Luke, if you can. Listen what it says. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. Think about this, and no more. For they have consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you, the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, the Moab and the Hagarites and the Gebal, Ammon and Amalek and Philistia and the inhabitants of Tyre and Assyria, and also joined them, and they all helped the children of Lot. I can give you a list of every one of those countries and who they are today. Just like when you talk about the Palestinians, you talk about the Ishmaelites, the Saudi Arabians. When you talk about on the Gaza Strip, Hamas. Even those are listed there, but they've just changed the name. So here's what I want to do. I want to do this. Now, also, I want you to realize this. Go to Revelation chapter 12. In chapter 12, we'll start with verse 1 and 2. Listen what it says in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. It says, "Now a great sign appeared in the heaven, a woman clothed with the sun." Who's this? This is Israel. "With the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child," who's the child? Jesus. "The child, she cried out in labor pain to give birth." Now go on to verse 3. "And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery dragon." Who's this? This is Satan. "Having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 30 of the stars of the heaven and drew them into the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born." Go on to verse 6. "And then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her with 1,260 days. Now, here's the thing. What would we have done after 9/11? Did we just say, well, they killed 3,000 of our people and we just ought to let that go? No. What has taken place in Israel is a atrocity. What they did to the women and children and babies and things is unbelievable. So what is Israel supposed to do? Just to stand back and to do this and let the world destroy them? Because one of the things that I just read to you in Psalms 83, "Let the name of Israel be no more." Did you listen in the last couple of weeks where one of the leaders of Iran at the United Nations basically said that his goal was what? That Israel would be no more. He would totally destroy him. What do we expect them to do? And yet we've got people that are protesting on college campuses and everything else, saying that Israel is the one. Israel has no choice in what they're trying to do. They're trying to save their very lives of their people. And so Israel, the conflict, and what this is a prelude to. Okay, so here we go. Let's see if this thing works. Hello, is it going to work? Don't tell me it's not going to work now. All right, what we got? Well, this is great. It's worked all the way up through here. All right, here we go. All right. I guess I got it. All right. Now, this is a map of Israel. And if some of you that don't know, see where Gaza is there? It's that little place right down in where the word Israel is, right above that. That's the Gaza Strip. Now, one of the places that Israel is going into right now is a place that's called Rafah. Well, where is Rafah? If you go all the way to where that major line is that goes up right by the eye in Israel, that goes up, that shows the southern border of Israel, when you look at that and you see that, where's Rafah? Rafah is right on that line at the very edge of Gaza. Is where they're going into now. They're not going into another place. They're going there. And how far is Rafah from Jerusalem? 100 miles. 100 miles. So that anytime they want to, they can lob a rocket or whatever they want to into that. Okay? 100 miles. And even to Tel Aviv is only about 100 miles also. Now, we used to know that when the days of Jesus were, that you had at the top of the map would be Galilee, where the West Bank and all that is, and that would have been Samaria, and then when you get down to Jerusalem, then you would have Judah. And you remember when Jesus said he had to go through Samaria because of the woman at the well. That's where that was. All right, now, so here's what I want to get into tonight. I want to get in to show you that here's the thing. You can outline the entire Bible just from Israel, from Genesis to Revelation. Okay? You can outline the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. The first 5 books of the Bible, which is called the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were written by Moses. And remember, God said, "I have chose you." So those 5 books say God chose you. Chose who? Chose Israel. I want to show you 3 things here that comes out of this. So the first thing is that God chose them. But you can outline the entire Bible from that. Now, if you go on Then Joshua, from the book of Joshua to Esther, God says, I give you this land. So number one, what does he say? You're my people. I choose you. And number two, I give you this land. And from the Euphrates to the Egypt, he said, I'm going to defend you, and you'll never lose a battle if you'll let me fight for you. And you say, okay, Lee, what about from the Euphrates? Because one of the things these young kids on college campuses are saying, from the river to the sea. Remember that? They're saying that today? Well, what is he talking about? All right, look at what it says in Genesis 15. If you can get out of there, Luke, and go to Genesis 15, verse 18 through 21. And God is reaffirming the covenant with Abraham. And he says this, on the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. And the Canaanites and the Kezarites and the Canaanites, and we go on to Hittites and the Pezerites and the Rephaim and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Gergashurites and the Jebusites. Now, so when we go back to that map, and when we go back to that map when we go back to that map, yeah, right there. Let me go back here. That map, that is nowhere like what God gave Israel. That's nowhere like it, because if you look where the Euphrates River is, you know, where you see Jordan and these other, the Euphrates River is all the way over here. So their land has been diminished. Every time that they have, you know, and every president we've had has tried to come and try to make peace over there. And every time they have tried to do that, one of their solutions is always, and they're doing the very same thing right now, to go to a two-state resolution. Well, who is it that has been willing to do that? It's Israel. The Palestinians have not been willing. Because why? They want to do one thing. They want to annihilate Israel. Let me go on here. So, yeah, okay. I'm going backwards now. I got to learn how. Okay. So then Joshua to Esther. So we got the first 5 books that says what? The first 5 books, God says, I choose you. Then from Joshua to Esther, God says, I give you this land from the Euphrates to Egypt. And he said, I'm going to defend you, and you will never lose a battle if you ever fight for me. Okay, so Joshua to Esther. Now, watch this. Then from the book of Psalms to the book of Malachi, what does God do? God promises the future. So what's he done? He says, I choose you. Then he says, I give you this land from the book of Joshua all the way to the book of Esther. He said, I give you the land. And then from Psalms to Malachi, God promises them. And the thing about this, he said, I'm giving you a future plan for them. And a lot of these books were written from Psalms to Malachi while they were falling into captivity during this time. So God says, I promise you a future. So he chooses them. He gives them the land, and he promises them a future. All right, now. So then we go into the New Testament. From Matthew to the book of Jude, it tells us that God uses them as his ambassador. When I go back and I read in the book of Genesis, I think it's chapter 12? I think it is. Yes. When God talks to Abraham about making a covenant with him, he says this, now the Lord had said to Abraham, get out of your country. This is, you don't have to go up there, Luke. This is Luke chapter 12, verse 1. He said, now the Lord had said to Abraham, get out of your country from the family and from your father's house and to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Now listen to what he says in verse 3. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him to curse you. I'm telling you, this is where our country is getting in trouble. Every time we go against a vote against Israel, guess what happens? A curse comes upon us. Do you remember just the last few weeks that when the ship hit the bridge and knocked the bridge down? I don't know, where was that? That was in where? Well, California, wherever it was. But remember when that happened? What happened prior to that? The day before, there was a vote in the United Nations, and we abstained. It was against Israel, and we abstained from. I'm telling you, someone gave me a book. That sucker is about that thick, and it lists every time that we have gone against Israel. That we've gone against Israel, something's happened in this country that's been detrimental to us. And so what God says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And you and all the family, and listen to this, and you and all the families of earth shall be blessed. God was not just dealing with the Jews. He was dealing with the whole world, because he was saying that what I want to do, I want to take Israel, and I want you to be an example for the entire world. That when people look at you, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, we want our God to be the same as your God. We want to be blessed by your God, and so we want to turn our lives over to you in this way. And that's what he done. So from Matthew, but what did Israel do? They failed. They failed. And so from Matthew to the book of Jude, all the way to almost the entire New Testament, tells us that God uses them as his ambassadors. Ambassador, and remember, every book he's written was written by an Israeli, or by an auspices of Israeli, such as Luke. Of course, we know that Luke wrote what? The book of Luke, and he also wrote the book of Acts. But every book in this Bible was written by an Israeli. So, all right. So, now, so we go on. Then in Revelation, so we've gone all the way through the Bible, talking about God's plans for Israel and for the whole world. And then when we get to Revelation, what does God say? He's going to finish his plan. He's going to finish his plan for them. And what's his plan? Now, what's going to happen to them? They're going to have to go through one of the toughest times in history, called the Tribulation. And what's going to, as a result of that, what will happen to them? They're going to turn to the Lord. They're going to see this. Now, so here's what we've said. If you want an outline for all 66 books then God chose them as his people. The first 5 books, God chose them as his people. Moses wrote those first 5 books. The next 15 books, he gives them the land. So the first 5 books, he chooses them as his people. The next 15 books of the Bible, he gives them his land, from Joshua to Esther. And then from Psalms all the way to Malachi, the next 39 books, God promises them a future through this, even though they've gone into captivity and everything else. And then the first 26 books of the New Testament, God is using them as his ambassador. And finally, what the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, God finishes his plan for Israel in Revelation. Now, so in the last 5 centuries, the world, that includes we Christians, also included in that, have fallen into a very bad habit. And what's that bad habit? In fact, if you read the newspapers or listen to the radio or television or the boob tube or whatever you want to call it, you'll hear an awful habit that the world has gotten into. And what's the world gotten into? We have brought in some of the early Roman propaganda, in that we have begun to use the name Palestine. Israel was never called Palestine. We call it Palestine. And so those we call Palestinians. Where in the world did that come from? Why was that land called Palestine? And here's the other thing. How long have the Jews been in Israel? How about 4,100 years? Yeah, 4,100 years. How long has the Palestinians been there? 56 years. And we're telling that they have the right to this country? I don't think so. Here we go. So the Roman emperor, so the Roman emperor Hadrian in 130 A.D. chose the word Palestine as his ultimate act, as he discriminated and tried to extinguish the Jewish people off the planet of this earth. Now, first thing he did, he killed 6,000 Jews when he came into Israel. That's the first thing he's done. There are some people that say they're preterist. And a preterist basically they basically teach and they believe that the tribulation and everything has already happened. They believe it happened in 70 A.D. Now, Josephus tells us in 70 A.D. that there were he says 1 million. Most people don't believe there was 1 million people killed. That was when Israel was destroyed. But you got a lot of problems there. A lot of problems with the book of Revelation and everything. Of course, the only way you can get there is, and just like all millennialists, the same thing, the only way they can get there is you've got to take the whole book of Revelation and make it totally symbolic. It's not symbolic. And so the things that it's talking about, the earth being destroyed and everything else in this time. Now, so Hadrian killed 6,000 Jews. So it is about as correct of calling Israel Palestine is calling Russia today the Soviet Union, or calling Berlin East Germany. And we act like we're in a time warp, seems like, but people today regularly say the word Palestine is describing Israel. The history of Palestine, when did the term originate? Well, how did the world and the church get into the habit of calling the place Palestine? Calling Israel Palestine, the reason is 130 A.D., when Hadrian, the emperor of Rome, who was a great builder, he built arches, he built water system, aqueducts, Carthon, and it was a master builder. Now, one of the things, if you read anything about Roman history, you'll find out that one of the things they did with their aqueducts, which was to carry water into the city of Rome, that they lined those with what? When you read the Babylonian, when you read Babylonians' things, their dream that he had. And when you, Nebuchadnezzar, when you read that, you read what was gold was the head, there was gold, and then silver was the chest part, then the lower part was made out of what? It was made out of, help me out here, guys. What? Bronze, and then the last part was made out of iron. And one of the things, because iron, each one of those symbolizes a period of time and what was the major thing. But the last part of Rome, it means made out of iron. Well, one of the things that they did, they lined their aqueducts with iron. And as a result of that, when the water came through, and so a lot of people feel like the fall of Rome was due to one thing, to a great extent, not the only thing, but it was to a great extent, of lead poisoning. Because they were drinking out of water that was that. So anyway, Hadrian was a great builder. He built a lot of stuff. But he also, more than anything else, he hated the Jews. Hated the Jews. They're telling us, I even heard today somebody talking about how that anti-Semitism is growing. Well, why is it growing, guys? It's growing because the church, one of the reasons I'll tell you, is because the church is not standing up like it should. We're not preaching what the Bible says. If we were preaching what the Bible says, and we were taking the Word and let the Word, the Bible tells us in the book of Isaiah, how do you interpret the Bible? You interpret jot upon jot, tittle upon tittle, word upon word is what you do. You just don't pick out parts and make it that way. And so as a result of that happening, what's happening is anti-Semitism is growing. But why is it growing? It's growing more than anything else because our Lord is getting ready to come back. And Satan knows that his time is drawing near. And so as a result of that, I think we're going to start seeing more and more evil like we've never seen it before. I think we're going to see manifestations of evil like we have never seen before. We're already seeing some of this stuff. But the history of Palestine, when did that term originate? Or when he opposed... The Jews revolted in 130 A.D. And by 135 A.D., he came to Jerusalem and he said, I'm going to stop the Jews from ever revolting again. But the Jews had revolted in the time of Julius Caesar and Titus, and finally the revolt of 130 A.D. with Hadrian. And what did he do? He came in, he killed 6,000 of them. But he came and leveled the whole city of Jerusalem and every Christian monument like Christ's tomb. And for instance, if you go over there, what you find out is everywhere you go in Israel, they built something over top of these things. Catholics have gone in there and done a lot of that, but the other place, for instance, the church that was built over where the Dome of the Rock is now, it built a pagan shrine over the Dome of the Rock. Over every Christian shrine, he changed the name of Jerusalem. He dedicated it to the gods, and for this reason, he wanted to erase the name of Jews. Now, how did he change the name? How did he change the name to Palestine? Palestine is a Latin means Philistia. What does that mean? Philistia. And it is the word Philistine. Well, think about it. Philistine today is related to the Philistines, and the Philistines were from where? They were from Greece. They weren't from Israel. They weren't from Israel. They weren't part of Jacob's group. And the Philistines today are from Jordan, Iraq, Laban, and all of them are Arab descent and Ishmaelite descent. So all these people that are called Philistines today, they're all from a descent. Even who was the guy that would? I always thought he looked like he's going to Pizza Hut. He had the thing on his head, the black and white thing. What was his name? Yasser Arafat. Where was he from? He was from Egypt. So there's nobody that was really, you could say, born Philistines would be this until the last 50-something years. And so, but none of them were from Jacob, and that where the Philistines were from. Why did he pick the word Philistine? Because remember what David went up against? He went up a giant that was a Philistine. And so he knew the Jews hated the Philistines. And it had a significance. So what did Hedron call the land? He called it after the defeated one. So the Philistines was constant reminder of a mocking of the victorious people. And so he hung it on them. Now, he said, I'm going to wipe Israel's name off to be remembered forever and make the name of the land cursed. And this land will never be called Israel. And he wiped the name of Israel off history. And thus, in Psalms 83:4, and they said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. No more. In fact, up until the time of Hedron, the land was called Israel and Judea and Samaria. So no one called the land Philistine until 135. No one called the land Philistine until 135 A.D. So Hedron's name of Philistine was not accidental. He took the name of Israel's enemies, the Philistines, and Latinized it, and his desire was to erase the name of Israel from all memory. You know, he said, I'm going to wipe out, he said, I'm going to wipe out Israel's name forever. And so the name Philistine applies to, the name Philistine applied to Israel was inadvertently the enemy to the Bible and the Jewish people. But Hedron was one in a long line of people that would be against God, and the Jewish people that will be kept off by the Antichrist who's coming. So Hedron was just playing his part by calling it Philistine. So it's interesting, the original Philistines were not Middle Eastern at all, but European from Greece. Now, here's what I want you to do now. I want you to look at the facts that God never called this land Philistine. If you go to some of these, and we're going to put them up there. For instance, if you look at Leviticus 25, verse 23, it said, the land shall not be sold permanently. And listen to what God is saying. And this is my point. Who really owns Israel? God does. God owns Israel. And you know, for those that are coming in and trying to do something to Israel, they're messing with the wrong person. They're messing with God. The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for your strangers and your sojourners with me. Listen to what it says in 2 Chronicles 7:20. It says, then I will uproot them from my land, which I have given them, and this house which I have sanctified for my name, I will cast out my sight, and I will make a proverb and byword among all peoples. Isaiah 14:25, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountain, my land, and on my mountains tread him underfoot. Then his yoke shall be removed from them, and his burden removed from their shoulders. Jeremiah 2:7, I brought you into a bountiful country to eat its fruit and its goodness. But when you entered, you defiled my land and made my heritage an abomination. Listen to what it says in Jeremiah 16:18. And first I will repay double for their iniquity and their sin, because they have defiled my land, and they have filled my inheritance with the carcasses of their detestable and abominable idols. Ezekiel 38:16. You will come up against my people, Israel, with like a cloud to cover the land. It will be a latter days that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me, when I'm hallowed out you, O Gog, before their very eyes. That's the Magog, Gog, and that's basically the 38 Israel, Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. All Israel's worst enemies came from the north. The Babylonians came from the north. The Greeks came from the north. The Romans came from the north. And so this is what he's saying. Ezekiel 38 and 39, Russia and Turkey and Muslims, they came from the north. They're coming again. And many people believe that we're on the verge of the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. Joel 3:2. I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is when the battle of Armageddon will fight. And I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have also divided up my land. And then Zechariah 2:12. And the Lord will take possession of Judah as his inheritance in the Holy Land, and he will again choose Jerusalem, is what he says. So here's the thing. Yeah. What's God saying? He's saying simply this. It's my land, and I'm going to get it back. That's what he's saying. So, even though, it's unbelievable that what's happened there. Now, the Jews went along with that and called Israel Philistine up until about 1948. What happened in 1948? They became a nation. They were given that land, and it became theirs. Do they not have a right to that land? Yes, they do. And why would we think different? So when what we're doing, we have lost our ever-loving mind in this country, and people that are protesting against this don't know what they're protesting against. Now, I've got another one of these, and I'll do it next Sunday night, go into this farther, that we can look at it, what's happening, and what's happening in the days ahead for Israel. But up to this point, here's what I wanted you to see. Who owns that land? God does. And the three things I wanted you to see out of this, what? He chose those people to be his people. He chose that land, and he chose to give them that land. And the third thing, what did he choose? He what? Yeah. So the three things he chose here, and so it's his land. And so I really believe that what's happening, it just ought to make us realize that the days are shortened now. That Jesus is getting ready to come. And I've told you that, and I keep saying it again. When I read Matthew 24, I read Luke 21 and Mark 13, when I read those verses. And Jesus tells us to look at the signs. He tells us to look at all those signs that are happening, earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars. And I think as soon as I say those things, I know there are people that are saying, whether they say it or not, it's just like what Peter said. Peter says that in the last days there will become those that will come saying, where is the promise of his coming? For things have continued on as they are. And then he goes on to say, to say as they are. Well, they don't continue on as they are. And the one thing the Lord has showed me in the last few weeks is when he talks about all those signs of Jesus coming, the one difference is one little word in all three of those, and it's the word all. And Jesus said, when you see all these things, we're the only generation in history that has ever seen all of these signs. all of these signs at one time. And just like, when Daniel talks to us about that knowledge will increase, well, what you got on your hip? You can Google anything you want to right now. Knowledge increase. He talks about how that the people are going to and fro. Well, why we've never had global traveling like we've had today. And these are not just happening here in the United States, it's happening globally. So we need to pray for Israel. We do this every Wednesday night here when we pray. One of the things we pray, the Bible tells us to pray for the peace of Israel. Well, when is there going to be peace in Israel? The only time there's going to be peace in Israel is when the Lord comes back and he sets up his kingdom. And I long for that day. We're going to have a verse of invitation if somebody's got something they want to pray about or something